What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I am your host, Redbeard, as always, and I really appreciate everybody tuning in this evening. And man, I'm here to tell you there is a lot of insanity taking place as of late. But I mean, as if anything's really that much different. But there's a few things that I would like to cover tonight. I hope you guys and gals get a little something out of this, and I'm sure that a lot of the things that I might bring up, you're probably fully aware of by now, but it's always worth bringing a lot of the contemporary things up. I don't know that I'm necessarily going to be evaluating entirely from like a super microscopic point, but there's some issues that I think are pressing, whether it's like the Epstein files, whether it is whether it's Iran, whether it is I just lost my whole train of thought, but there's a few things that I want to try and cover tonight. So I hope you guys and gals are ready for that. I don't right now have a guest lined up for next week, but I'm going to try and work on that. And if you haven't yet, go take a look at the episode that Scott Horton was just on with last Thursday, I believe it was. My brain is not working that well today. I feel like that was a pretty good episode. And Scott also had some really good things to say about the Iran situation, the protests, and a lot of the things that are going on there. So go check that out if you haven't. And without further ado, let's kind of jump into things here. Just want to double check the chat here real quick. Gene the Machine, super good to see you. Dave, great to have you in. Chuck and Money, always great to have you. Thank you, everybody, for stopping in today. This should be a pretty good show. So the first thing I want to start with, I think probably because it's one of the more immediate contemporary, it's all over the news right now. It's kind of taken the headlines by storm, is the Epstein thing. Needless to say, there's a lot of names that were put out there. George Bush Sr., you had Clinton that came up, you had Elon, you had a variety of people. And my whole thought process on this is, even though that there is a lot of information coming out, that we're getting a lot of files out, I really don't think that they're showing us everything it is that they have. And I really don't think that they're presenting all of the files that they possibly could, which kind of makes me wonder, of all the things that they are releasing at the moment, what are the things they're not releasing? And I'm not talking about any of the crazy stuff, none of the videos, pictures, obviously any of that stuff. That's probably not going to be ever anything that likely is ever going to see the light of day beyond the federal government. But the point being is, I do feel like there's going to be a lot of files and a lot of other material that have names, that have emails, that have conversations, whatever the case is, that are probably likely going to be pertinent to figuring out a lot of this stuff. And I just think that they're holding back. And this is an administration who was filled with people initially who had talked about, this situation to where it's just like, oh yes, we're going to be the most transparent administration in the world, in the history of the United States. We're going to bring out the truth about Epstein. And then it barely took any time at all for them to be like, oh, it's just a hoax. It doesn't exist. The files don't exist. Epstein did kill himself and yada, yada, yada. It was just this whole menagerie of just cover and coping and lies and trying to pretty much push the American people away from this idea that there was ever anything related to Epstein that, as Trump says, we still talking about this creep. Well, he's still relevant, and he's relevant because of the fact that once you kind of open Pandora's box, you can't really shove anything back into that box. So one of the things that stuck out with me, though, and there's a lot of files, there's a lot of things kind of swirling around the internet, on X, and I don't know if Instagram has a lot of it. I don't get on there as much, but on a variety of other platforms, is you have a lot of files that, pretty much show a lot of the grotesque details, from the conversations and the goings on. You have, witness testimony, victim testimony, etc. And the other thing that a lot of people realize, though, is when you look at a bunch of these, there are a number of them where it shows, like to and from, but there's also a lot of them that black out either who they're to or who they're from, or in some cases both, which is really suspect to me, because typically if you're going to be if you're going to be blacking out an area like that, the whole point was to protect the victim. So are they trying to imply that these people are somehow victims, or whatever the case is? I mean, it doesn't really seem to add up to me. Now, what really makes things a little bit more peculiar is when you look at these blacked out areas, you look at the to and from, you look at the litany and the list of people that have immediately essentially kind of been associated with this whole thing that's going on, this whole menagerie. And in Gene the Machine just said, even Prince Andrew has a ton of stuff there. And I'm sure that there's world leaders all over the place that are going to be involved in this. But the idea that you have these blacked out areas when you have so many other areas with so many other names that are just openly shown, it doesn't make any sense to me. This idea that they can show like, oh, it's coming from Epstein or it's coming from Maxwell or whatever the case is, but then you can't show who it's going to. But then it's like, if you look down into the documents, there's probably a good potentiality, or even in the address to the letter, right, potentially, to where it's like, oh, all right, well, that's who it's going to. So, and in some cases not. But my point being is, why is it, if you're trying to be transparent, if you're trying to release these emails, which took basically an act of God, Congress, and thankfully Thomas Massey was a hawk on this thing. One of the few times I'll ever say a hawk is a good thing. We even got these, but it's like, it really does seem like they're trying to stutter step everything that's going on as it pertains to Epstein. It seems like it's endless deflection. It seems like they're doing anything and everything to avoid or to not be involved with Epstein. There was an extreme reluctance before, and none of it really seems to add up. Now, one thing that I did find somewhat interesting, and I'm going to see if I can bring this up appropriately for you all to see, and I may, let's see here. So I'm going to bring up a page that's been kind of making the rounds. And the reason I'm using this is because I do think that there is a pretty big peculiarity here, okay? There's a page specifically that talks about Trump. And in this page, and you'll see it, it lists a large swath of allegations as it pertains to Trump about things that potentially did or did not happen, right? These are things that are witness testimony. So when you look at these things and you look at where Trump is included on this, it does say in one of the areas, matter of fact, I'll just bring it up here. It does say in one of the areas that, the witness was not deemed credible. But what's ironic about this is if there's no issue, if the witness isn't deemed credible, then why did the DOJ go and scrub this particular file from their website? So I'll show you the file here, because none of that really seems to make sense to me. All right, so what we're looking at, and I don't know if you guys and gals can see this very well, but essentially this is the file here. I will try to, well, I think I'm going to have to stay in frame here. But essentially, these are the reports. I'm not going to go really out of my way to go through this. There's a lot of people that have done this already, but I just wanted to show you the file in question. This is the file in question here that is alleged to be like, oh, there's no credibility to it. The witness didn't have credibility. But in my mind, what doesn't make sense to me about this is if there's no credibility to the file, there's no credibility to the witness, as it says, or the complainant, right down here, complainant was spoken to and deemed not credible, right? We can all kind of see where this is here. Why then, if it's not really a problem, if the complainant was not deemed credible, then why would you scrub this file from the DOJ website? That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. If it's essentially not accurate, if it's something they don't believe has credibility, if it's something that they don't think is a problem, especially as it pertains to Trump, then why is it that you're scrubbing this file? I thought this was supposed to be the most transparent administration in history. So riddle me that. There's a lot about that particular file that really tends to stand out to me. Again, you can look all over. If you throw a rock in a direction, you're going to hit a file somewhere on the interwebs and on X and a myriad of other social media platforms. But my point being here is, if they're doing it with this file, if they're going through and they're blacking out the tos and froms, if they're blacking out some of the other information, what else is it that they are not telling you? What is it that they're not releasing? What is it that they're saying is incredible, and then they're trying to scrub it from the DOJ website? That raises a lot of questions to me. Okay, you don't go that far to get rid of a file in this whole release dump if it's not that big of a deal, right? So I found that to be somewhat interesting. I don't know, where this is all going to go yet. Clearly, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of names. There's a lot of very prominent names that are involved in this. So I'm interested to see what more is going to come out. I'm interested to see how it's going to be handled. If I was a betting person, I'm willing to tell you, or I'm willing to put my foot out there and say, I don't think we're going to see anything happen to these people. I don't think we're going to see a prolonged investigation. I don't think we're going to see anybody brought to court over this. I think what's going to happen is we're going to have a situation in which most of these people, if not all of these people, are going to be let go scot-free. And we're not going to see any justice or any form of legal process that is going to happen with really any many, if not any, of the names that we see in these files. So we'll see kind of how this tends to escalate and how these things are going to proceed and roll on. But I'm not really holding my breath. It's really just kind of a travesty. And look, I'm here to tell you, if you're still using the copium and you're still trying to defend this administration, as it pertains to something like the Epstein files, and you don't look at a bunch of other things that are going on in this country, and you're like, yeah, I don't know that I trust this administration anymore. I mean, you have people like Kash Patel, you have Pam Bondi, you had Dan Bongino, you had all of these people that just were talking about incessantly of like, we're going to be transparent, we're going to bring the truth, we're going to bring the fight, we are going to hold these people accountable. They get in that position of power, and they absolutely become just the 180 opposite. They become totally a just hypocritical group of individuals, and then all you get is either a blatant lie or you get an absolute cope fest for this administration, admittedly saying like none of this stuff exists. So at this point, which one is it? Do they exist? Do they not exist? Clearly, with these files, you're starting to see that, oh my goodness, yes, these things do exist. And this is kind of the state that we're at now. And, it really does beg the question, as I said earlier, what else are you willing to trust this administration on when they can't even be honest about high-level international pedophile rings that involve people within our highest echelons of government and the governments of many other places? Naivete or living in this perfect little bubble might be great, but look, in the end of the day, I mean, the credibility is gone. There's no credibility. Everything at this juncture, in my humble opinion, should be looked at as suspect. They should not be out from underneath the microscope in any way of criticism. They should be held to not just the highest standard, but a higher standard than what initially is required. And we shouldn't let these people walk away from this stuff. We should demand and continue demanding until we get answers, beating on the walls, that people not only are held accountable, but that we get the truth. And again, I'm not holding my breath on that. I'm really not, because anytime you ever ask the government to investigate itself, whenever you ask the government to look up or see if they've done something wrong, you're never going to find the government being like, you know what? Yeah, we kind of messed up on this one. They're always invariably dispositioned to typically defend their own. And that's the way that this power structure works. So look, I hope we find the truth. I'm not holding my breath. So that's kind of my portion here for the Epstein. Again, there's a lot of people that are covering this right now. I'm trying not to regurgitate or say too much that everybody else is saying, but I did find that as being a very interesting peculiarity, at least in my opinion. And there's a lot of information to sort through, and I'm sure that this is going to come back up here probably within the next couple of weeks. As soon as more stuff starts coming out, but I'm not gonna try and rehash a bunch of stuff that many other people have done so far. So, with that being said, there is another thing that I would like to talk about. Let's see if I can pull up what I need to here. So I'm going to share this. It's I have two things here from antiwar.com. Hopefully, let's see. All right. So if you guys and gals can kind of see this, Trump is considering strikes on Iran to reignite the protests. Essentially, the protests have kind of quelled to some degree. Scott Horton was talking about the issues in Iran. If you kind of want more of a full-blown approach on that, go back and check out the episode I just did with Scott Horton. But, you know, there's what I think is interesting is we're really living in kind of this sunk cost fallacy of foreign policy. And I know I continue bringing up the sunk cost point, right? But it really, the more you start to look around, the more and more you start to see it takes root. And it's one of those things to where when we're looking at Iran, you continue having this rhetoric to where it's just like, oh, you know, like if you don't do this, then, you know, we're going to unleash like the greatest thing in the world on you. It's going to be so much bigger. If you thought the 12-day war was going to be terrible, then you haven't seen anything. And, you know, and you continue having this rhetoric. And now we're back. You know, Trump just sent another battle fleet with a carrier back over towards Iran. And so we have this situation to where, you know, President Donald Trump is considering strikes in Iran, hoping the attack will restart anti-government protests. By the way, this article is done by Kyle Anzalone. This was put out on January 29, 2026. Reuters reposted on Thursday that Trump was hoping strikes on Iran would reignite the protest movement. Earlier this month, the president was considering striking the Iranian government and security forces in response to the crackdown on demonstrators. Now, the other thing that I want to point out, and that you might see from the discussion that Scott and I were having last Thursday, was the fact that really, if you look at the origin of these protests, very, very difficult to find that these protests are in any way organic. When you look at that in conjunction with the amount of, I think it was 40,000, I want to say it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 40,000 Starlink nodes and modules that essentially had cropped up in and around the time that these protests started off. And then you look at the amount of time of these protests and how long they only went on for a couple of days. And I think it's very interesting because Trump, I believe, and the administration was hoping that this was going to hopefully propel the people of Iran, at least this is their thinking, into looking for regime change. Now, if you know anything about the American government, they love themselves a good old-fashioned regime change. They would love to have more influence in a place like Iran, especially when you consider the influence that exists here with Israel in this particular situation. And so you know, I think, though, that when you look at the approach by the administration, if they really had wanted to go full-blown boots on the ground, you would have seen something like that in Venezuela, where in Venezuela, they had a little bit more of a surgical approach, and they didn't quite go in terms of like full-blown boots on the ground, right? You had a situation where they ended up sending in a Delta team, you had airstrikes, and you had you know, limited operations in Venezuela. And I think that's kind of what the Trump administration was and still is kind of hoping on, is that the Iranian people would do more of the heavy lifting, whereas the United States would eventually augment their ability to try and do this. Now, you know me, I'm an anti-war guy. I don't believe that we should be globetrotting. I don't believe that we should be empire building. We sure as heck should not be doing regime change. And if I've said ad nauseum time and time and time and again, based off of the founders' understanding of what war was, it was essentially any act of aggression from one sovereign upon another. It's pretty plain and simple. There was no real threshold. It was just simply any fundamental act of aggression. There was no limiting factor there. There was no threshold. So when we look at this, there is an expectation that he is going to want to make war if he doesn't get the things that he wants. And so far, he's put forth an ultimatum of several things, up to and including surrounding the nuclear issue, surrounding their ballistic missiles, and a variety of other things. Now, again, I don't think we're going to see a full-blown invasion of Iran based off of what we've seen so far. But I do think that Trump eventually, when he realizes he's not going to be able to cut a deal, if that's the case, I think he's going to do some type of a strike and commit to war against Iran. Now, all of that being said, I want to bring back here. Let's see. I have another one that I would like to show you. Let's see. Go to this one here. I wish it would stop sending me off the page. We have this one here. Senior Israeli officials give Trump admin intelligence on targets in Iran. Again, this is by Kyle Anzalone at antiwar.com on the 29th of January. I'm just going to read a short excerpt just for all of you who are interested in checking out these articles. I will put them in the description down below for you guys and gals to read on your own time. Essentially, it says the Israelis came to D.C. to share intelligence on possible targets inside Iran. Israeli military intelligence chief General Shlomi Binder, I think is how you pronounce his name. I'm not very good with Middle Eastern or Israeli names, so forgive me. Led the Israeli delegation and met with the U.S. officials at the Pentagon for 2 days earlier this week. U.S. officials told the outlet President Donald Trump is still considering an attack on Iran. One official with knowledge on the meetings said Binder had brought intelligence that was requested by the president. So again, what you're seeing is the situation to where there's this interwoven, entangling alliance between Israel and the United States, something that the founders wholly warned against. And when you look at the pattern of these wars and the warfare state within the United States, and you look at our actions in the Middle East, and you look at the two primary people that are always involved in conducting these operations, where there's the United States, there's Israel. Where there's Israel, there's the United States. These two countries just can never seem to be separated, though I would imagine that with some of the documents that have come out with Epstein, it's certainly probably not going to be helping the case for the Israelis because, there's some links. And some of those documents speak for themselves. Some of the things that a lot of people kind of already assumed may be affirmed as it pertains to Epstein, Mossad, and the Israeli government in general. So, but you always see this intertwining, right, of Israel and the United States, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Libya, whether it's in Iraq, Afghanistan, whether it's in places like Iran. There's always this situation to where whether it's intelligence sharing or it's some type of operational capacity, one is where the other is. And I want to just point out, too, that Netanyahu is slated to come back to the U.S. Capitol, I believe, sometime here soon. I don't know if that was supposed to be over the weekend or if it was going to be sometime next week. I don't remember off the top of my head. But it's amazing because one of the best things I heard recently is Netanyahu comes around more than the moon phases, which I think is kind of funny. But it's clear that there's something going on as it pertains to Iran, and that there are already plans, or at least some form of a plan that's being set in motion to prepare a strike package for Iran. Now, Iran has said that they will be steadfast, that they are ready, and that they have people ready to essentially defend or retaliate on a hair trigger, is what came from a higher echelon Iranian spokesperson, or I think he might have been a government official earlier this week. So I think that we're kind of on a knife's edge here. I do think it's in some way you're going to see the setup similar to Venezuela, where it's going to be talking until all of a sudden you're going to have a situation where Trump is just going to be sick of it, and he's just going to go in with essentially the quote unquote nuclear option, meaning he's just going to throw some bombs around, see what they hit, and probably try and walk away again, saying that it's a great victory. So we'll see how that plays out. I mean, there's ramifications. There's always blowback to stuff like this. And the idea that, that we could do this and not have any type of ramification, at least within the region, I think is pretty devoid of any real intellectual honesty today. So that is the short little piece that I have on Iran. And I hope you guys and gals are able to follow along with that a little bit. Now, I do want to hit on some of the stuff as it pertains to Minnesota. And I think Minnesota is a very interesting situation where you have a situation where you have the federal government that's coming in, and you have, I do believe that there are agitators that do exist on the left that are creating problems. There's clearly a situation where this is happening, but I also think that there's clearly a situation where a lot of these federal officers are completely out of line. And I think that as you're looking at how all of this stuff plays out, what you're starting to create is a situation in which you're creating an extreme environment where the chaos factor is only going to continue to go up and go up and go up. The more and more that they try to intensify operations in Minneapolis, to try and find illegal aliens, to try and get them at a point to where they can be deported. Now, I have seen a few different reports saying that there was an attempt to start de-escalation, and they are going to do a somewhat of a drawdown, but they weren't going to be bringing ICE and other agents out of Minnesota entirely. That one I'm not entirely sure of. I've seen a few different things, and it seems like there's slightly conflicting information. So we're going to have to see how that plays out. But one of the things that I was talking to a good friend of mine the other day about is my point on this is a lot of people are caught up on the radical side of the left, and you have people that are caught up on the federal government and the things that they're doing. And one of the things that I would posit is anytime that you start to see stuff like this, whether it is Minneapolis or any other incidents, is you have this situation in particular when it comes to immigration, to where I don't exactly feel like there's an actual incentive to try and deal with the immigration problem. Not on the Democrat side especially, but I don't think that it actually exists with the Republicans. Now just hear me out here. The reason I say that is because if you took the immigration issue away from the Republicans, there's not many platforms that they technically stand on that they, one, have overwhelming support with, that they do very well with, but also that they can concretely say that they actually stand on this position, that they're willing to do what they need to do on it. And likewise, when you look at the Democrats and you look at the way that they posit themselves or position themselves on this particular issue of immigration, they need this situation to exist in order to justify a lot of the chaos that they foment. So you have, on one hand, an expansion of government power. On the other hand, you have controlled chaos. And I think when you start to mash these things together, you start to create this perfect storm of absolute chaos. You have environments that become very dangerous. You create extremely dangerous situations. And I think that when you zoom back out and you're not specifically looking on one incident or the other, what you're going to find is it's kind of this interesting symbiotic relationship to where one side has to have the other side in its current existence in order to justify the things that it does. So you see this a lot when it comes down to government power, the way that the government thrives, consolidates, and brings power together. You typically tend to see a symptom, and then you start to see a cure, right? So you start to see these things that come together. without the Democrats, without the agitators, without the people that go and cause problems, it's very hard for the right or the Republicans to justify an expanded military budget, an expanded law enforcement budget, an expansion of law enforcement powers, whether that be federally or otherwise, and to justify the invasion on privacy amongst American citizens, and more. So this whole thing, just in my opinion, I think it's far broader than the immigration issue. I think what you're seeing is a situation not just with the immigration issue, but with a lot of different issues that you see, to where you have this symbiotic relationship that only does one thing. It achieves one major thing where everybody else gets shafted in, right? Which is the consolidation of power. And what you'll find is it doesn't really matter who it is that has the predominant amount of power. One requires the other in order to gain said power. So I would say probably at best, what you're going to start to see is potentially a correction where you have a situation where things might get a little bit better as this process goes along. But at the same time, I think at the worst case scenario, we all end up losing. It's one big club and we're not in it, as George Carlin says, and you're going to see this aggressive consolidation of power. And I think the best thing that they've ever been able to do is to convince people that we're the benevolent side or we're the benevolent side. In my mind, I think we as American citizens are stuck between these two powers that are perpetually, obviously, vying for more control. But in the end of the day, if you've ever really noticed when you have, the right that gets out of, out of the administration or the federal government, and you have the left that comes in, the left never relents the powers that the right put in place, and vice versa. They will always use, they will always expand, and they will always keep in so much as they can and never give up any power that was granted or brought forth by the opposing side. And that's why you get the argument that a lot of people have, which is it's two wings of the same bird. There's no incentive for these groups to stop what they're doing. As a matter of fact, it's good business practice for the Democrats to fight the Republicans, because in the end of the day, they sit down, they have dinner with each other, they go to the same galas, they go to the same balls, they still meet up, they talk to each other, they do this and that. And in the end of the day, you just get shafted, right? It's all one big show. It's all one big performance. And I think that's the tragedy of it. And you have people that are stuck in this perpetual loop where they actually think that one side is going to be more righteous than the other side. And I think when you divide out the way that the left versus the right paradigm, or the Democrats versus the Republican situation, tends to cut out, is the only thing that's generally a little bit different is the means in which they go about performing their operations and the ways that they feel comfortable in doing this. So there's different methods, but you essentially get the same monstrosity in the end of the day. And this is, I think that to me is more of the bigger contention. That's more of the long view of things, as opposed to necessarily, looking at something necessarily of like the ICE operations or the counter, or like the agitators. And I just want to put out there too, it's important to understand that there is this tendency, I think, amongst people where they're very reductionist in the way that they think. They're very simple in the way that they think. And while there are certain things that are necessarily white and black, you do have a lot of gray area and a lot of nuance in a variety of different situations, issues, events, etc. And what that means, at least in my mind, is you may still have people that are legitimately going out and protesting. You may still have people that haven't thrown a single rock, a single brick, or a single punch the entire time they've been out there. But what you do have, and I think this is a desired outcome in the end of the day, is you have this conflation that all protesters are bad. You can't trust a single protester, because if you show up in a particular area at any given time, you are suspect of disruption, of riotous behavior, of being an agitator, et cetera, et cetera. Now, again, yes, this may have some weight in terms of the fact that there are people that do go to certain events, they show up in certain areas, they cause problems, and they do start to create a public safety issue, right? You have people that go and breed chaos for the sake of breeding chaos. But I want to remind people that when you have all these individuals that talk about like, oh, they're paid, they're funded by this person, they're supported by this person, they get money from this company. If you look at all the ties when it comes to all of these funders, all of these people, whether it's Soros or whoever it is, have you ever noticed that if this was the case, have you ever noticed that regardless of what administration is in there, left or right, that this man has not seen a day in prison for his hand in disruption? Why is that? If that's the case, if we know that these things are happening, we know that they're paying these people, if we know that they're sending and trucking people in, then why is it that people like Soros and many other people have never seen the inside of a prison cell? Because it's not advantageous to either the left or the right, because they need this chaos in order to grow more of their control, to grow more of their power, and to keep the apparatus alive. Chaos is the lifeblood of this particular government. And much to my chagrin, I don't like it, but it is what it is. And we have to start recognizing that you have useful idiots on each side, you have people that are used on each side, and you have people that have nothing to do with any of the chaos whatsoever that ultimately get folded into it because it's very convenient. Now, that being said, you have the federal government, which is not beyond its mistakes. You have the federal government, which is not beyond its criminal behavior. Quite frankly, I would argue that the federal government of the United States is one of the biggest criminal organizations that exists. And when you look at the way that they've conducted operations, not necessarily just specifically as it pertains to something contemporary like ICE or whatever the case, but you have criminal behavior by this government in a wide variety and a wide facet of many things. And might I remind you, this is the same government that people are trying to steel man for a lot of different things that they've done wrong, is the same government that's not going to tell you the truth and that wanted to tell you that the Epstein files did not exist, that they weren't the thing, that it was a big hoax, after they had just told you that we're going to be the most transparent government in the world. We're going to be the most truthful government that exists. We're going to do right by people. We're going to bring America back. We're going to make America great again. But yet all they've done is systematically disgrace and destroy this country, whether it's people within the Trump administration, whether it's Biden, whether it's Obama. This is a long history of this going on. And this idea that there's really these two competing sides that really, are trying to vie for the soul of America, I think is one of the most ridiculous concepts I've ever heard. Because when you look at where the paper trails are, when you look at the people that should be in prison, when you look at all of the riots and all of the chaos and all of these different things, and then you look at the left or the right that says, look at what I've done, and they have nothing to show for it, then you have to sit back and ask yourself, am I the fucking idiot in this situation? And I'll leave you to your own conclusions. I'm not saying I'm right, and I certainly don't have all the answers, but one thing that I do attempt to try and do is try and connect the dots where they make sense. I try to seek out the patterns, and I try to present an argument that, look, even if I don't get you to come to my side, which I don't, if I do, great. If not, I hope in the very least what the aim of this particular podcast has always been about, one, is to try and look at things through a lens of liberty to the best of my abilities, and to try and present information to the best of my abilities, but also to try and get people to think, not go to Grok, not go to ChatGPT, not go to whatever vacuum of information it is that you like to go to, but to break out of some of these things and to be able to constructively think for yourself, to come to your own conclusions, to do the best homework and education that you possibly can. So that way you can try to say, maybe the things that I think or that I think I believe maybe aren't the right things, or maybe they're the things that I wasn't led to believe that they were, right? We should always be questioning authority. We should always be questioning what the narrative is. We should always be questioning what is going on as it pertains to our government. Eternal vigilance was one of the key points that our founders brought up, right? Is that the average person should be eternally vigilant of what their government does, to be jealous and jealously guard our liberties and our rights from abuses and aggressions by the federal government and by any government for that matter, right? So these are things that I think of, and whenever I try to present something, this is the way that I try to frame it. And I hope that tonight you were able to try and see some of that. You're maybe able to start asking some more questions. You're maybe able to start trying to see things in a way that maybe you haven't looked at them before, right? And I think as it pertains to Minneapolis, and I think the things that happened in Minnesota, there's a lot of things for me that don't add up. I think it's terrible. I think there's a lot of very sad and regrettable things that are taking place there. As you know, it's things that shouldn't have to happen. It's things that shouldn't be happening. But this is the situation that we're in. This is the situation where we are presently, right? Where you have ICE that's going and trying to do these deportations. You have CBP that's helping and assisting in some way. And, you know, you're starting to have all of this chaos. And I think it's just one big blender that's going to chew people up, regardless of what side you're on in the end of the day. And I think you're only going to see more chaos eventually come from this. I myself, full disclosure, I do think we need to have a good, sound, realistic immigration policy. I think that there should be something that should be easy to understand. There should be an easy process. There should be a way that you can functionally do these things. I do think, whether we like it or not, that borders are a thing that exists. And I think until we get to a point to where people can try and figure out how to live without them, this is the situation that we're in. And so we have to work within this particular confine at times. And I think as it pertains to borders, they exist. So we work with what we have, right? I'm not saying it's a perfect system. I'm not saying it's the preferred system. I'm not saying it's a system that works overly well. But I do think that there are a lot of people that believe in having a strong border. I do think there's a lot of people that do believe that deportation should happen. And when you look at how that's handled, I think if you're somebody that advocates for that and you're somebody that feels strongly for that, then one of the responsibilities that we have as a nation and that we have as a people is to ensure that these types of things are handled at the very highest level, to the best of our ability, in the most constitutional way that we possibly can. We are a nation that is built on liberty and rights. We are a nation where we feel that the lifeblood of the American people is liberty. A proper and just society, as once evaluated by Justice Blackburn, was one that was predicated on liberty, right? So these are just a few things that I want people to think about. Now, I understand that there's people that will come down on either side of this. That's fine. Again, I don't expect everybody to agree with me. I don't expect everybody to have the right answer. I certainly don't all the time. And I certainly probably don't have it most of the time. But I am trying to sift through a bunch of this stuff. And so I think when you look at the complexity of how the government operates, you look at agitators, and then you look at everybody else in between, I think it's an absolute shit show. So with that being said, I know that was kind of a fast 45 minutes, but I really, really appreciate everybody that took the time to be able to come out, check out the video tonight, or check out the live tonight. And I really appreciate every single person who takes the time out of their day to come and listen to what it is that I have to say. I hope you're able to get something out of it. And I really do hope that, in the very least, that maybe we can start to see a future where there's a little bit more liberty, where the rights do matter a little bit more, where our posterity, where our future has more of a fighting chance. Because to me, that is what it's all about. That is the foundation that we're on. And I hope that we can start to see these things crop up just a little bit more immediately as it pertains to our, our immediate communities, between our neighbors. Go out there, have the discussions, talk with people. Don't be afraid of talking with people, and get to know the people around you. There's so many people today that I feel like don't even know who their neighbors are. And they have this predisposition idea of, well, my neighbor's probably this, or my neighbor does this. And I hate to say it, but it's as petty as my neighbor drives this car, so they're probably this. And I'm here to tell you, you might disagree with your neighbor on a lot of things, but I think you'll find a lot more agreement than you will disagreements. You can't just live your entire life on places like X, and you can't live your entire life on social media in general, and then just assume that that's going to be every single thing that there is, full stop. Go out experience the world, talk to people, get to learn about what's around you. And I think you'll be somewhat surprised to figure out that there's a lot more people that you'll agree with stuff on versus disagree with stuff on. So I'm just going to mull through a few things here in the chat. Let's see. I would rather have the truth than deal with it rather than have nothing and have Chinese whispers, I think is what Gene the Machine was saying. Yeah, look, I'm of the mind to where if you release something like the Epstein files, I really do kind of feel like there is a situation to where, look, if it absolutely annihilates the current system that we're under right now, and it puts the people that are responsible in the places that they need to be, whether that's prison or otherwise. Look, I mean, I'm willing to sacrifice the continuity of this government for the truth, and I know that's a stand that some people might not take, but look, I mean, it becomes a thing to where it's like, how much longer do you allow something like this to go on? It's a stain on the soul of this nation, and it's a stain, I think, on the soul of the individuals who not only defend it, but the people who sit quietly and say nothing about it. So yeah, I agree with the truth. Minnesota's a big show. Two rival groups using people's lives to gain more and more power. Chuck and money, 100%, brother. I totally agree with you. I really do. And it's a very, very unfortunate vacuum that we see because oftentimes, whether we want it to turn out this way or not, as average people, it does end up becoming violence. It's more than just the ICE situation. It becomes a situation in which you see this proliferated through a variety of different things, whether it's like ATF enforcement, whether it's DEA enforcement, whether it's immigration enforcement, whether it's whatever the case might be, the FBI. I mean, there are abuses of power, and there are power to contesting powers at play that will use and weaponize whatever it is that they can in order to create this ball of chaos. And I know I only hit a handful of the alpha soup agencies, but I think you get my point. So that's a great point, Chuck. Thank you for that. Let's see. This is not taking place in other states that ICE is in. There's no riots and craziness in states that are not Democrat run, like Texas. Illegals are removed by the tens of thousands, no problem. So here's my theory on that, David, is I think Democrat-run cities they're a good petri dish. That's what I think. And I'm not saying that there aren't massive problems there. There certainly is. But I think it's a perfect breeding ground to where you can have kind of these, these turf wars, or you have these two rival groups that come in and they can hash it out. And I think it's because they realize that you can have these fights where, for the most part, nobody's really going to care. Nobody really scoffs at the idea of the federal government going in and fighting against a bunch of agitators and trying to enforce their will or their law in a Democrat-run city. It's not something that I think overwhelmingly breaks, the hearts of millions, right? Because it's almost kind of expected. And I'm not saying that there's not bad incidents, and I'm not saying there's not tragedies. Clearly, I was trying to articulate that, but I just think that when you look at Democrat-run cities, and I think in the grand scheme of things, I think the federal government I think they try and pick their battles in places to where they feel like if they do something wrong, there's not really going to be that much of a reprisal, if that makes sense. So it's pretty crazy. So, but I appreciate the comment. Let's see. I'm going to just throw. So Chuck was saying in Michigan, our Dem governor is working with the Trump administration. We have the biggest ICE detention facility in the Midwest. You don't hear tons of this show of force in Michigan because they are cooperative. Yeah, and that is another facet of it too, right? Is there's no doubt that cooperation between the state and the federal government, regardless of how people feel about that, right? Regardless of how you feel about the federal government coming into states and doing the things that they want to do, right? Because I know that's another contested subject, but however you feel about that, there is some credence to that, to where when you have general cooperation across the board, you have a state that's willing to allow it to occur. Yeah, I mean, by and large, I think a lot of people are emboldened by politicians that feel that they can that they have support from. And with that being said, again, I think that's also one of those things to where it goes back to this realm of being able to pick your battlefronts, right? So I think when they look at a place like California, when they look at a place like Minnesota, when they look at a place like New York, those are ripe grounds for being able to ferment chaos. And I say that as, having those two opposing groups where, the Democrats, or the left, I should say more generally, in a sense, and the right in a sense more generally, I think they feel like they're able to kind of play out this situation where they can create this chaos, they can get away with it. There's not really going to be that much of a reprisal, and after 2 weeks, everything's just going to blow over and people will forget about it. So I think it's somewhat a case of not even just like the prospects of how many people you can extract from an area, but I think it's also where they feel their biggest fight can be, where they have the ability to kind of just do whatever they want. Whereas when you take that incentive away and you have cooperating governments, well, it's kind of morbid to say it this way, but it's not as fun. That's it's kind of a sad way of looking at it, but I think in the grand scheme of things, this is kind of where we're at. So it's an absolute mess. Man, I just, my big thing is I really would like to see these things. I would like to see a conclusion to this, and I would like to see a conclusion to not just the immigration issue, in terms of like doing so in the best way that can be done, and but in a variety of different things, whether it's foreign policy or whatever the case is. I have said, and I've stood by the idea for a long time that, well, a long time being probably the past year, that whenever it seems any of this administration's officials really get pressed on what the roadmap is, what the plan is, what the end state, what the end goal is, how it is they're going to go about achieving it, how it is that they're going to go about accomplishing the tasks, whether that's in phases or whatever the case is, and ultimately what it all looks like. It seems like a lot of these people either can't tell you, they won't tell you, or they have no idea what they're trying to do. And it doesn't make me very optimistic. We see this, everything from immigration to foreign policy to the economy. And it seems like if they don't have an answer at times, they'll just BS you on an answer. And it just, it creates, again, it's more questions than you're left with any real form of answers or any real direction. I feel that if more people had a direction on a majority of these things and it provided some type of an outcome, I'm not saying people would necessarily agree with it still, but I'm saying that you would probably have more people that are like, well, okay, so there's at least an end goal in sight. So we know kind of where this is going to be. We know what this is going to look like, I think that's a big thing. So with that being said, I'm not going to ramble anymore. I really, really appreciate everybody stopping by, taking the opportunity to come by and watch the live. Thank you for supporting me. Thank you for listening to what I had to talk about tonight. And I hope that each and every one of you continue to carry that torch of liberty, not only everywhere you go, but really taking the time to open people up to it, have the important conversations, get out there, be the difference it is that you want to see. And I will see you all on the next one next Saturday at the same time. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.